The first one I saw died in the middle of Hemlock Road, right by the old stone wall where kids used to drink beer on Saturday nights. It wasn't a glorious death. There was no flash of plasma, no heroic last stand. It just sort of fell over. One of its 3 long legs, thin as a willow branch, had snapped clean in half. A bone, or something like bone, jutted out from its gray, leathery skin. It was making a noise, a soft, wet chuffing sound like a dying radiator. I'd been in my truck, a Ford F-150 that was older than my daughter Lily. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs. We'd been hearing the news for 3 days. The ships, dark and silent as tombstones, had appeared in the skies over every major city. The broadcasts went haywire. First came the screaming, then static, then nothing. We were told to stay inside. We were told to wait for instructions. I was on my way to the hardware store to board up the windows, my mind a buzzing hive of fear for Lily, who was with her mother 2 states away. Then I saw it. The thing. It was maybe 7 feet tall if it stood up straight, but it was hunched over, clutching its broken leg. Its head was long and narrow, with no discernible eyes, just 2 deep black pits that seemed to drink the morning light. It didn't look like a conqueror. It looked like a deer that had been hit by a car and left to suffer. I killed the engine. The silence that fell was heavy, broken only by that pathetic chuffing sound. My shotgun was on the passenger seat, loaded with buckshot. I'd grabbed it from the back of my closet, the metal cool and terrible in my sweating hands. This was it. The moment of truth. Man versus invader. Jake Riley, owner of Harmony Creek Hardware, versus a creature from the stars. I got out of the truck, the shotgun feeling clumsy and alien in my grip. I kept the truck between me and it. My breath fogged in the crisp Maine air. The thing on the road shifted. It tried to pull itself forward with 2 spindly arms, each ending in 3 long, delicate fingers. A trail of thick purple fluid, dark as grape jelly, smeared the asphalt behind it. The smell hit me then. It wasn't foul, not like blood or rot. It smelled like cinnamon and burnt wires. It lifted its head, the black pit seeming to find me. The chuffing sound got louder, more desperate. It wasn't a war cry. It was a whimper. It was the sound of pain. My finger was on the trigger. My whole life, every movie, every book, had prepared me for this. Squeeze, don't pull, aim for center mass. But its mass was so fragile. Its chest was a narrow, bird-like thing. I could see its ribs, or the ridges of them through its thin skin. Then, before I could decide, before I could be either a hero or a coward, it shuddered violently. A spasm ran through its long body. The chuffing sound became a single, high-pitched whistle that hurt my ears, and then it went still. The purple fluid pooled around it, steaming slightly in the cool air. It was dead. I stood there for a long time, the shotgun feeling impossibly heavy. I hadn't done a thing. It had just died. Broken leg, shock maybe. That was the first shock. The second came an hour later. Over the crackle of a battery-powered radio. It wasn't just here, it was everywhere. From New York to London to Tokyo, the story was the same. The invaders, the great terrifying threat from the void, were falling from the sky. They were tripping on curbs. They were walking into walls. They were dying from the common cold. The war for humanity had begun, and we weren't even fighting. We were just watching them die. Their bodies littered the streets of our cities like fallen leaves after a storm. The invasion was a slaughter. Their slaughter, And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Before the dying started, there was the silence. For a full day after the ships appeared, nothing happened. They just hung there, obsidian daggers pointed at the hearts of our cities. They blotted out the sun. In Harmony Creek, we couldn't see the big one over Boston, but the sky felt bruised, the quality of the light all wrong. People talked in whispers. They bought up all the canned soup and bottled water at the shop and save. I sold every generator, flashlight and battery I had in the hardware store. The fear was a living thing, a fog that seeped under doors and through cracks in the windows. I tried to call my ex-wife Sarah 100 times. 100 times I got that fast, busy signal that meant the circuits were overloaded. Lily was with her. My Lily, all of 9 years old, with her gap-toothed smile and her obsession with drawing dragons. I imagined her looking up at the sky in Hartford, her small hand in her mother's, and a cold fist closed around my own heart. I wanted to drive there, to smash my way through whatever stood between us. But the roads were a nightmare. The governor had come on the emergency broadcast and told us to stay put. He sounded like a man trying to read a eulogy without crying. The first reports of contact were chaos. A shaky cell phone video from Times Square showed one of the creatures emerging from a ramp. It was huge, majestic, terrifying. It took 3 steps onto the pavement, stumbled, and went down like a sack of potatoes. People screamed, but not for the reason you'd think. They screamed in confusion. The thing just lay there, twitching. We all thought it was a trick, a ruse. They were lulling us into a false sense of security. The real attack would be devastating. We waited. The military set up perimeters. Fighter jets, looking like tiny, angry insects, flew sorties around the silent ships. Nothing. The second day, the truth began to leak out like water from a cracked dam. A group of them in Paris had apparently tried to navigate a public staircase. The result was a pile of broken limbs and shattered bodies at the bottom. In Moscow, one had been taken down by a stray dog that had barked at it, startling it into the path of a bus. The bus driver was being hailed as a hero, though he was reportedly in psychiatric care, rambling about how easily it had popped. Here in Harmony Creek, we didn't have to deal with buses or staircases. Our first encounter was Old Man Hemlock's cat, Patches. Patches, a fat, lazy tabby, had been sunning himself on a porch rail when one of the creatures wandered into Hemlock's yard. According to Hemlock, who told the story to anyone who would listen down at the town hall, the creature had reached out a long, curious finger. Patches, in a rare burst of energy, had hissed and swiped at it. The scratch was barely a scratch, a thin red line on its gray skin. The creature had looked at the scratch, then at its hand, and then it had made a sound like a surprised bird. Then it had started to swell up. Not just the hand, the whole arm, then its chest. Within a minute it had collapsed, wheezing. By the time Sheriff Brody arrived, it was dead, an allergic reaction to a cat scratch. That's when the new fear began. It was a different kind of fear. Not the fear of a powerful enemy, but the fear of the unknown, the absurd. It was the queasy, disorienting feeling you get when the world stops making sense. These things had crossed the unimaginable gulf of space, in ships that defied physics. They had technology that was probably centuries, if not millennia, ahead of our own. And they were being killed by cats, by stairs, by the simple act of tripping. Their biology was catastrophically, laughably fragile. Our world, our very air, our gravity, our germs was a death trap for them. We weren't a planet to be conquered. We were a planetary scale poison, and we were all living in it. The first real battle for Harmony Creek, if you could call it that, happened in the parking lot of the high school. A group of 4 of them had come down from the woods behind the football field. They weren't armed. They weren't marching in formation. They were just wandering like confused tourists. Word spread fast. Phones still worked for local calls, a shaky, fragile web connecting us. Someone called the sheriff's office. Someone else called me. By the time I got there, a small crowd had gathered. Maybe 30 of us. We weren't soldiers. We were loggers, mechanics, teachers, stay-at-home moms. But we had guns. After the news from the cities, everyone who had a gun had it with them. I had my shotgun. Dale, who runs the auto body shop, had a deer rifle. Mary Ann, the librarian, had a little silver pistol that looked like a toy in her trembling hands. The 4 of them stood by the chain-link fence of the tennis courts looking at us. They were tall and unnerving, their featureless faces impossible to read. But there was no menace in their posture. They looked tired. One of them was leaning against the fence post, its shoulders slumped. Sheriff Brody, a big man whose guts strained the buttons of his uniform, held up a hand. "Everybody just hold on now," he said, his voice trying for command, but coming out shaky. "Let's not do anything stupid." Nobody listened. The fear and confusion of the past few days had curdled into something else, something ugly. It was Riggs who started it. Riggs was a local contractor who'd always been a bully, the kind of guy who got a little too much pleasure from being in charge. "What are we waiting for?" Riggs shouted, brandishing a heavy aluminum baseball bat. "They're monsters." He started walking toward them. A few other guys, his usual cronies from the local bar, fell in behind him. "Riggs, stop!" Brody yelled. But Riggs was on a roll. He was playing the hero. He hefted the bat. The aliens just watched him come. They didn't raise a weapon. They didn't even tense up. One of them made a soft clicking sound, a noise of curiosity. Riggs swung the bat. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew how to swing. He put all his beer gut muscle into it. The bat connected with the nearest alien's leg. I was expecting a thud, a crack of bone. Instead, there was a sound like a wet melon splitting open. The leg didn't just break, it ruptured. It came apart in a spray of that purple jelly blood and shattered brittle bone. The creature shrieked, a sound that was half a bird's cry and half a squealing tire. It fell, clutching the mangled ruin of its limb. The other 3 aliens took a step back. They didn't attack. They didn't defend, they just looked at their fallen comrade. Their movements jerky and panicked. They looked terrified. That's when the shooting started. Dale's rifle cracked, the sound deafening in the wide open space. One of the standing aliens jerked, a neat dark hole appearing in its narrow chest. It didn't fly backward like in the movies. It just deflated. It folded in on itself, collapsing to the ground in a heap of gray skin and long limbs. Someone else fired, then another. It became a contest. A turkey shoot. I stood there, my shotgun still not raised, and I watched. I watched as Mary Ann, the librarian, fired her little pistol. The bullet hit one of the remaining aliens in the shoulder. It staggered back, tripped over its own feet, and its head hit the corner of the concrete bench by the tennis courts. There was a sickening crunch, like stepping on a dry gourd. The last one stood frozen for a second, surrounded by its dead and dying companions. Then it turned and tried to run. It was clumsy. Its long legs were not made for speed on our unforgiving ground. It got about 10 feet before a dozen bullets tore it apart. It was over in less than a minute. 4 beings from another world were dead or dying in the high school parking lot. Riggs stood over the first one he had hit, which was still twitching, and brought the bat down again and again, his face a mask of savage glee. The rest of us just stood there in the sudden silence, the smell of gunpowder and cinnamon heavy in the air. We had won. It was an absolute, undeniable victory. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an execution. It felt like a crime. The silence that followed the slaughter was worse than the noise. It was a thick, guilty silence, punctuated by the wet, gasping sounds of the one Riggs had kept working on. He finally stopped, his chest heaving, the aluminum bat dripping with purple fluid. He looked around at us, a wild, triumphant grin on his face, expecting cheers. He didn't get any. We all just stared at the mess. The bodies weren't noble or fearsome in death. They were just ruined meat. They looked pathetic. The one whose head had hit the concrete bench had a skull that had caved in like a cheap pumpkin. The purple blood was already starting to congeal, losing its weird, otherworldly sheen, and just looking like a spill someone would have to clean up. Sheriff Brody walked over and looked down at the carnage. He took off his hat and wiped his bald head, even though it wasn't a hot day. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he whispered. It wasn't a curse, it was a prayer. I looked at Dale. He was leaning against his truck, his deer rifle held loosely in one hand. His face was pale. He looked like he was going to be sick. Marianne, the librarian, was crying, her shoulders shaking silently. She had dropped her little pistol on the ground as if it had burned her. This was the part the movies always left out. The cleanup. The shame. We were the victors. We had faced the alien invaders and annihilated them without a single human casualty. We should have been celebrating, hoisting Riggs on our shoulders. Instead, we felt like murderers. There was no honor in this. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. It was like stomping on ants. Except the ants were 7 feet tall and had crossed the stars to get here. The psychological toll began to set in almost immediately. We had prepared for a war of resistance, a noble struggle against overwhelming odds. We were ready to be the brave underdogs. We were not prepared to be the remorseless bullies. In the days that followed, this same scene played out all over the world. The aliens were clumsy, fragile, and utterly unprepared for the sheer, brutal violence of our world. A planet where everything, from the microbes in the water to the gravity pulling them down, was hostile. They had no concept of blunt force trauma. Their bodies were not designed to withstand it. A punch that would give a man a black eye could shatter their facial bones. A fall that would bruise a child could kill them. We learned their ships were mostly automated. The aliens themselves were not warriors. They were more like scholars, or maybe pilgrims. We found their data devices. When the smart people finally started to translate them, the picture became even more horrifying. The devices weren't filled with battle plans. They were filled with poetry. Star charts that looked more like art than science. Philosophical treatises on the nature of existence. They had come here not to conquer, but to observe. Maybe to find refuge. Their homeworld was dying. We were seeing the last remnants of a civilization, a species on the brink of extinction, and we were swatting them like flies. In Harmony Creek, things got quiet. People stayed indoors. The initial frantic energy was replaced by a kind of communal depression. We had looked into the face of the enemy, and we had seen something fragile and bewildered. And we had smashed it to pieces with baseball bats and shotguns. I went back to my hardware store and sat in the dark. The boards on the windows I'd put up to keep monsters out now felt like they were keeping the shame in. I thought about Lily. What kind of world were we making for her? A world where humanity proved its superiority by slaughtering a species that couldn't even navigate a flight of stairs. We hadn't been tested. 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 We had simply been given a chance to show our true nature. And what we had shown was a capacity for casual, effortless brutality that was more terrifying than any monster from the stars. The war wasn't changing us. It was revealing what we had been all along. The easy war made us ugly. It didn't take long. When your enemy is so weak that a child could kill it, the rules change. Here is no bravery in it, no honor. All that's left is the raw, naked act of killing. And some people, it turned out, liked it. Riggs was one of them. He and his crew, the same guys who drank with him at the bar and backed him up in the high school parking lot, became the unofficial defense force of Harmony Creek. They drove around in Riggs's big contractor truck, with shotguns mounted in the back window. They weren't defending anything. They were hunting. Any report of an alien sighting sent them peeling out, tires squealing. They called it pest control. They'd come back with stories, laughing about how one of them had tripped in the woods and broken its neck, or how they'd cornered another in a barn and played with it for a while before finishing it. They were carving notches in the stocks of their rifles. Most of the town just tried to look away. We were ashamed, but we were also scared. Not of the aliens anymore, but of Riggs. The power had gone to his head. He was the man with the guns, the man willing to do the dirty work. He started making demands. Extra gasoline from the town's emergency supply. A bigger share of the canned goods we'd all pooled. Sheriff Brody tried to stand up to him once. Riggs just laughed in his face. "What are you going to do, Sheriff? Arrest me for protecting this town?" He'd sneered. "These things are a menace. I am doing what needs to be done." The real threat wasn't from the sky anymore. It was standing right next to us, wearing a flannel shirt and a self-satisfied grin. The world was fracturing along these same lines. On the news we saw reports of factions forming. Militias who had appointed themselves the exterminators. They saw the aliens as a plague to be wiped out. Then there were the scientists and the governments. What was left of them, trying desperately to capture some of the aliens alive for study. This led to firefights. Human against human over the bodies of the dying invaders. The new horror was watching what we were becoming. It was listening to the casual cruelty in people's voices. It was seeing the excitement in the eyes of Riggs's men as they loaded their weapons. They had been given a license to be their worst selves, and they were taking to it with a passion that was sickening. One afternoon I was in my store, sorting through inventory, when a kid came running in. It was Timmy, the son of the woman who ran the diner. He was out of breath, his face pale. "Mr. Riley," he gasped, "tea here is one in the old cannery, and Riggs is on his way." The old cannery was down by the river, abandoned for 20 years. A skeleton of rusted metal and broken windows. A perfect place to corner something. I didn't think, I just moved. I grabbed a heavy maglite flashlight from the counter, not as a weapon, but just to have something solid in my hand. "Stay here, Timmy. Lock the door behind me." I ran. Not to my truck, it would be too loud. I ran through the back alleys and across the town green. I could hear the rumble of Riggs's truck getting closer. I had to get there first. I didn't know why. It wasn't about saving the alien. I knew that was a lost cause. It was about something else. It was about drawing a line. It was about saying that this wasn't okay. That we couldn't just let the worst of us take over. The aliens weren't the monsters. They were just the mirror. And the reflection I saw in it was of a humanity I didn't recognize. A humanity that was eagerly, joyfully tearing itself apart in the face of a victory it had done nothing to earn. The war wasn't against them anymore. It was against ourselves. I got to the cannery just ahead of Riggs's truck, my lungs burning. I slipped in through a collapsed section of the wall, the rusted metal groaning under my weight. The inside of the building was a cavern of shadows and decay. The air smelled of rust, river mud, and that strange spicy scent of cinnamon and ozone. I saw it almost immediately. It was huddled in a corner, behind a mountain of rotting wooden pallets. It wasn't as tall as the ones I'd seen before, and it seemed thinner, more frail. It was making that soft chuffing sound, but this one was different. It was rhythmic, almost like a language. It didn't seem to notice me. Its attention was focused on something it held in its long three-fingered hands. It was a smooth black stone, about the size of my palm. As I watched, a faint milky light began to glow from within the stone. I froze. This was different. This wasn't a dying creature. This was something active. The alien tilted its head, and the light from the stone projected an image onto the dusty concrete floor. It wasn't a sharp image like a movie, but a swirling holographic cloud of light and color. I saw shapes begin to form. A sky that was a deep, impossible violet. 2 suns, one gold, one white, hanging in it. I saw structures that were elegant and twisted, like seashells grown to the size of mountains. It was beautiful. Hauntingly beautiful. Then the image changed. The violet sky turned a sickly brown. The beautiful structures crumbled, flaking away like old plaster. The ground cracked open, spewing a black tar-like substance. I saw other aliens, thousands of them, fleeing. I saw them looking up at the sky, their featureless faces somehow conveying a sense of absolute despair. And I saw the ships, not the dark, menacing daggers that hung in our sky, but smaller, more desperate-looking vessels. They were lifting off from the dying world, a frantic exodus. They weren't an armada. They were lifeboats. The alien in front of me shifted its grip on the stone. The image flickered again. This time I saw our solar system. The sun, a brilliant yellow star, the planets in their familiar order. And then it focused on Earth. It was a jewel of blue and white and green. The image conveyed a sense of hope, of sanctuary. They weren't invaders, they were refugees. They had crossed the galaxy not for conquest, but for survival. They had fled a dying home, searching for a safe harbor. They had chosen our world. And they had arrived to find that the very thing they sought, a world teeming with life, was the deadliest poison they could have ever imagined. Our air, our water, our gravity, our biology, even our architecture was killing them. The chuffing sound the alien was making now sounded like sobbing. It was showing me its history, its tragedy. It was trying to communicate the most profound mistake in the history of the universe. The roar of Riggs's truck pulling up outside shattered the moment. Headlights sliced through the grime-caked windows, throwing long, distorted shadows across the vast room. The alien flinched, the light on the floor vanishing as it clutched the black stone to its narrow chest. It looked up at me, the two black pits of its face, seeming to bore right into my soul. It wasn't a look of fear, it was a look of appeal. I understood then. It wasn't about saving this one creature's life. It was about saving its story. It was about understanding. The truth of the war was 1,000 times more tragic and more terrible than we had ever imagined. We weren't fighting monsters. We were kicking a man who was already down. A man who had lost everything and had come to us for help, only to find himself in a place that was even more hostile than the one he had fled. I looked from the terrified refugee in the corner to the door where Riggs and his men would soon be bursting through. And I made a choice. I wasn't going to let them have this. The heavy steel door of the cannery screeched open, protesting on rusted hinges. Riggs stood silhouetted against the bright afternoon light, the baseball bat slung over his shoulder like a king's scepter. Two of his cronies, Billy and Pete, fanned out behind him, shotguns held at the ready. "Well, well, well," Riggs said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Look what we have here. Riley playing welcome wagon." His eyes scanned the shadows, quickly finding the huddled alien. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Looks like you found our little lost tourist." I stepped forward, positioning myself between them and the corner. I held up the heavy Maglite flashlight. It was a pathetic weapon against their guns, but it was all I had. "Leave it alone, Riggs." Riggs laughed a short, ugly bark. "Leave it alone? Jake, have you gone soft? This is what we do. We clean up the trash." "It's not trash," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's not even a threat. You know that." "It's a monster," Billy chimed in, his face eager and flushed. "It doesn't belong here." "It was showing me something," I said, trying to appeal to a part of them I wasn't sure even existed. "They're not invaders. They're lost. Their world is gone. They came here for help." Riggs took a step closer, his smile gone now, replaced by a look of irritation. "And I should care why. They come to my planet. I don't care what their sob story is. This is our world, not theirs." He gestured with the bat. "Now get out of the way, Jake. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns all of us," I insisted. "What we do right now, this matters. We can't just be this." I waved a hand, indicating the guns, the bat, the whole ugly situation. "You know I am getting real tired of your sermons, Riley," Riggs said, his eyes narrowing. "Ever since this started, you've been walking around with a face like a funeral. We're winning. Humanity is winning. You should be happy." "This isn't winning," I shot back. "This is just cruelty. Here is no fight here. Can't you see that?" "I see a bug that needs to be squashed," Pete said, leveling his shotgun at the alien. The creature behind me let out a low, whistling keen. It was a sound of pure terror. It was clutching the black stone so tightly its knuckles, or what passed for them, were white. The moment hung there stretched thin. The dust motes danced in the beams of light. I could smell the river, the rust, and the fear. My fear. Their fear. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath. I thought of Lily. I thought of the world she would inherit. A world where men like Riggs made the rules. A world where compassion was seen as a weakness. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. Number. Riggs's face hardened into a mask of rage. He had been challenged. His authority, which he had built on fear and brutality, had been questioned in front of his men. He couldn't let that stand. "Fine," he snarled. "Have it your way." He didn't come for the alien. He came for me. He lunged forward, swinging the bat, not at my legs or my body, but at my head. I saw it coming, a silver blur of violence. The war had finally come to Harmony Creek. It wasn't human versus alien. It was me versus him. It was neighbor against neighbor. And the prize wasn't a planet, it was the last tattered shred of our own humanity. Riggs swung the bat and I did the only thing I could. I ducked. The aluminum bat whistled through the air where my head had been, and slammed into a rusty steel support beam, with a deafening clang that vibrated through the whole building. I didn't have time to think like a hero. I thought like a hardware store owner. I thought about leverage and weak points. I swung the heavy mag not like a club, but like a hammer, aiming for his wrist. The metal casing connected with bone. Riggs roared in pain and surprise, his grip on the bat loosening. It clattered to the concrete floor. "Get him!" he screamed at his men. Billy and Pete hesitated. They were hunters of fragile, confused creatures, not fighters. They weren't prepared for a real confrontation. But Riggs was their leader. Pete raised his shotgun. I didn't wait. I scrambled backward, deeper into the maze of decaying machinery and pallets. "Don't just stand there, you idiots." "Shoot him!" Riggs yelled, cradling his injured wrist. A blast of buckshot tore through the air, ripping a chunk out of a wooden pallet near my head. Splinters flew. The sound was immense, a physical blow in the enclosed space. I dove behind an old conveyor belt, my heart hammering. This was insane. I was going to die here, in a derelict cannery, defending a refugee from another world against the local bully. I had to do something. I had to get away. Not just for me. For the story. The black stone the alien held was more important than my life, or Riggs's, or anyone's in this town. It was the truth. My mind raced. I couldn't fight them head on. I had to use the environment. The cannery was my weapon. I knew these old buildings. They were full of traps for the unwary. I peeked over the conveyor belt. Pete was reloading, his movements clumsy. Billy was cautiously advancing, his shotgun sweeping back and forth. Riggs was behind them, his face purple with rage. I saw my chance. A heavy chain hoist hung from a ceiling beam just above Billy. Its controls were on a rusted panel on a nearby pillar. It was a long shot. I took a deep breath and bolted from behind the conveyor belt, running not away but parallel to them, toward the pillar. Billy spun, surprised, and fired. The shot went wide, peppering a sheet metal wall with holes. I slammed my hand down on the big greasy town button on the control panel. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of tortured metal, the chain hoist began to descend. Billy, confused, looked up just as the heavy, rust-covered hook swung down. It caught him square in the chest, not with the point, but with the flat, heavy side. It didn't pierce him, but it knocked the wind out of him and sent him staggering backward. He tripped over a pile of debris and went down hard, his head cracking against the concrete. He didn't move. One down. Pete stared in disbelief at his fallen friend. That hesitation was all I needed. I scooped up a loose brick from the floor and hurled it with all my might. It wasn't a graceful throw, but it was desperate. The brick caught Pete on the side of the head. He grunted, dropping his shotgun, and stumbled sideways, clutching his temple. Now it was just Riggs. He stared at me, his face a mixture of fury and shock. His wrist was clearly broken. His 2 men were down. The advantage had shifted. "You are a dead man, Riley," he hissed. But there was a new tremor of fear in his voice. I didn't answer. I started backing away toward the corner where the alien was still huddled. It had watched the entire violent, clumsy exchange, its featureless face unreadable. I reached the corner and looked at it. "We have to go," I said, my voice hoarse. "Now." I didn't know if it understood my words, but it seemed to understand my intent. It rose unsteadily to its full, frail height, still clutching the black stone. Its long, spindly legs looked like they could snap at any moment. My plan was forming, desperate and crazy. The river. The cannery backed right onto the Harmony River. It was cold, fast-moving, but it was an escape route. I had to get this creature and its story out of here. I had to get it to someone who would listen. I had to find a way to call Lily, to tell her I was okay, to tell her that her father was trying to do the right thing in a world that had gone completely, horribly wrong. My desperate plan was simple. Survive. Survive and tell the tale. Riggs wasn't going to let us just walk away. Pride is a powerful and stupid motivator. He saw me moving toward the back of the cannery, toward the loading bay that opened onto the river, and he came after us. He was favoring his broken wrist, his face pale with pain, but his eyes were filled with a hateful fire. He had picked up a length of rusted pipe from the floor. "You are not getting away," he shouted, his voice echoing. The alien was slow, its movements awkward and stiff with terror. I put my hand on its back, urging it forward. Its skin felt cool and strangely smooth, like worn leather. We stumbled through the debris, past silent, looming machines that looked like sleeping iron giants. The loading bay doors were huge and corrugated, rusted half open. A gap of about 4 feet led out onto a crumbling concrete dock. Beyond it, the Harmony River flowed dark and cold. It was our only way out. We reached the opening. I pushed the alien gently through the gap. "Go," I said, "get to the water." It hesitated, looking back at me with those deep black pits. For a second, I thought it was going to refuse, to just give up. Then it turned and scrambled out onto the dock. I turned back to face Riggs. He was 10 feet away, breathing hard, the pipe held in his good hand. This was it. The final pathetic showdown in the ruins of our town's past. "It's over, Riggs," I said, my voice low. "Just stop." "It's over when I say it's over," he snarled. He lunged, not with a wild swing, but with a straight, vicious thrust, aiming the jagged end of the pipe at my gut. I sidestepped, and the pipe scraped against the metal door frame. With a shriek of protesting metal, I used his forward momentum against him, shoving him hard in the shoulder. He was off balance, his good arm extended. He stumbled forward, past me, out into the open space of the loading bay entrance. And that's when Old Man Hemlock appeared. I hadn't even seen him. He must have followed the commotion, creeping in as silently as a ghost. He was standing just outside the opening by the edge of the dock. He was holding his old double-barreled shotgun, the one he used for duck hunting. Riggs saw him and froze. "Get out of my way, you old coot," he spat. Hemlock didn't say a word. His face was a grim, wrinkled mask. He just looked at Riggs, then at me, then at the alien, which was now hesitating at the edge of the dock, looking back at the scene. He seemed to understand everything in an instant. Riggs took a step toward Hemlock, raising the pipe. "I am warning you." The shotgun blast was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It wasn't buckshot. It was a slug. It hit Riggs center mass, lifting him off his feet and throwing him backward. He landed in a heap on the concrete, the pipe clattering from his lifeless hand. There was no final speech, no dramatic last breath. He was just gone. I stared at Hemlock, stunned. The old man looked down at the shotgun in his hands, then at Riggs's body. A profound sadness seemed to settle over his ancient features. Then we heard a groan from inside the cannery. It was Pete, stirring. He was alive. So was Billy. This wasn't over. "Go," Hemlock said to me, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Get it out of here. I'll hold them off." "You can't," I said. "They'll kill you." A thin, weary smile touched his lips. "I am 82 years old, Jake. My wife is gone. My kids are grown and live a world away. What else am I going to do? Let men like that inherit the earth." He racked the shotgun, ejecting the spent shell and chambering the second one. "Now go. Tell someone what really happened here." I didn't have time to argue. I owed it to him. I owed it to the alien. I owed it to myself. I turned and ran out onto the dock. The alien was waiting. I grabbed its thin arm. "Come on." We jumped. The shock of the icy water was breathtaking. It stole the air from my lungs. I held on tight to the alien's arm as the current grabbed us, pulling us away from the cannery, away from the town. As we were swept downstream, I heard another shotgun blast echo from the building, followed by the crack of a different gun. Then silence. Just the rush of the river and the cold, dark water closing in around us. The river saved us and nearly killed us. The current was strong, pulling us downstream in the darkness. Away from Harmony Creek, the alien was surprisingly buoyant, its frail body bobbing in the water beside me. I clung to it, partly to guide it, partly to keep myself from going under. The cold was a physical pain, seeping into my bones, stealing the strength from my limbs. We washed ashore about a mile downstream, on a muddy bank, tangled with tree roots. I crawled out of the water, shivering uncontrollably, my clothes weighing a ton. The alien lay on the mud beside me, making a series of soft clicking sounds. It still held the black stone. We lay there for what felt like hours, the moon a pale sliver in the sky. I thought about Old Man Hemlock. I thought about Riggs. I thought about the bloody, pointless violence in the cannery. There were no victors there, just a body count. Eventually, the shivering subsided into a deep, aching cold. I knew we had to move or we'd die of exposure. I got to my feet, my muscles screaming in protest. "We have to go," I said to the still form on the ground. The alien stirred. It pushed itself up with its two spindly arms, its movements slow and labored. It looked at me, and I felt that strange sense of communication again, a feeling of gratitude, mixed with immense sorrow. We stumbled through the woods for the rest of the night, guided by the faint light of the moon. We were heading south, away from my town, away from everything I knew. In the early morning, as the sky began to lighten from black to gray, we saw the glow of a small town in the distance, and more importantly, a cell tower, its red light blinking like a lonely star. We found a deserted barn on the outskirts of the town. It was dry and relatively warm. The alien huddled in the hayloft, its energy spent. It curled into a ball the black stone held to its chest, and seemed to fall into a deep sleep or trance. I found an old farmer's coat hanging on a peg, and I put it on. It smelled of hay and motor oil. It was the best thing I had ever smelled. My phone had been in a waterproof case in my pocket. Miraculously, it still worked. The battery was at 12%. I had one call to make. My fingers were stiff and clumsy as I dialed Sarah's number. It rang once, twice. My heart pounded with every ring. What if she didn't answer? What if the lines were down again? "Hello?" Sarah's voice. Tense, frayed, but it was her. "Sarah, it's me," I said, my own voice cracking. "Jake? Oh my God, Jake, where are you? Are you okay?" "I am okay. I am okay. Is Lily there? Is she safe?" "We're safe," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "We've been so worried. The news, it's all so crazy. Let me talk to her," I pleaded. "Please." A moment later, a small voice came on the line. "Daddy." And I broke. The tears I had been holding back since this whole nightmare began finally came. "Lilybug," I sobbed. "Hi, sweetheart. I am so glad to hear your voice." "Are the monsters gone, Daddy?" she asked, her voice small and innocent. I looked over at the sleeping form in the hay, this refugee from a dead world, this last survivor of a cosmic tragedy. I thought of Riggs and Hemlock, dead on the concrete floor of the cannery. "Yes, honey," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "The monsters are all gone." But I knew it was a lie. The fragile, clumsy creatures from the stars were almost all dead now, wiped out by our world and our own casual brutality. The invasion was over. The slaughter was complete. But the real monsters were still here. They were us. They were in the mirror. They were the ones who had found it so easy to kill, so easy to hate. The war against humanity had been won, but we had lost something essential in the process. We had lost ourselves. And as I stood there in the quiet barn, with the last alien sleeping nearby, I knew the fight for our own souls was just beginning, and it would be a much harder war to win.